Hi, my name is Ted Ritzer, and I'm the host of the Greening Government webinar speaker series. It's a collaboration between my department, Alberta Environment and Parks, the Alberta Climate Change Office, and the Municipal Climate Change Action Center. The format of the series is we have 40 minutes of presentation, followed by 20 minutes of Q&A. The Q&A, you can pose questions through an online Q&A window. And today we're very fortunate to be joined by two PhDs from CSIRO in Australia, Dr. Lucy Cameron and Dr. George Quesada. And you guys have been doing a lot of research, really interesting research on innovation and sort of the use of information technology and how, besides sort of everybody's using the terms, smart communities and smart cities, but I think you guys are looking at some very interesting ways of sort of growing a digital green economy. And this series is about helping governments in Alberta reduce their carbon footprints and grow their green economies. So maybe just before you start, if you could give us a little bit of an understanding of what Data 61, the research center, is. So with that, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. And yes, we have been looking at how technology can be used to make cities far more efficient and therefore green. George and I come to it from different backgrounds. I worked in digital economy policy for a number of years for a state government here in Australia called Queensland, and was looking at primarily using co-working centres and mobile workforces to reduce commuting and car dependency in our large urban centres. And George has a bit of a different background.
Yep. So yeah, I'm an organisational psychologist by training, and came into CSIRO to really explore industry transformation. And I started looking at the electricity industry to start with, and then moved into the water industry, and more recently cities and the built environment. And really quite keen to understand how essentially old industries flex to new technologies and new business models and market shifts, basically. So yeah, so that's a little bit about my background.
So the process of transformation.
Yeah. And Data 61 is the digital tech part of CSIRO. So CSIRO has several business units, and one of those is Data 61, and the work there is all about doing research and advancing digital technologies, whether it be machine learning, advances in user interface like augmented reality, sensor technology, and drones. Yep. And our particular area is focused on
predicting the future.
Well, yeah. So kind of studying the future. How will these technologies change our cities? Is one question. Our economies, the nature of government. A whole bunch of questions there.
Yeah. Okay, so we might dive into our presentation, which is city design and connectivity, and what is a truly smart city, because we do want to differentiate between a high-tech city and a smart city, because you can have a technology-rich city, which we wouldn't get a very smart. The technology really has to work for people, and it has to overcome a lot of the problems with urbanisation, or the negative externalities which arise from greater urbanisation. So a lot of people would know that most countries in the world are increasingly urbanising, and better communication networks and better transport systems have historically caused greater urbanisation, along with things like mass production. Urbanisation really took off in a big way in the UK, for instance, with the development of the cotton mills. And it hasn't really stopped in that, as industrialisation waves have occurred in different countries, so have bigger cities. So the technology to support the cities has developed along with the size of the cities. So in Australia, we have a large landmass and a small population. And a lot of people relate Australia with the outback image and, you know, the deserts and the rural character of Australia because of exports like Crocodile Dundee. But in fact, Australia is one of the more highly urbanised countries around the world. And if you look at that graph on the right, you can see that as Australia's total population has been growing, so have our cities. Virtually none of the population growth has happened outside the cities. So we are already highly urbanised and we are becoming more urbanised. So we are very concentrated on how do we overcome the growing pains and the pressures that that is putting on our major cities. Just for a bit of perspective, this is a graph from the UN on world urbanisation. Australia is up in that top third. Canada is not far behind Australia. So we are countries which have, you know, a lot of land, but we are highly urbanised. At the very top of that graph are the island states like Hong Kong and Singapore, which are virtually city-states. So with the growth of cities, cities exist because there are efficiencies having people grouped together and having industries grouped together. So some of the things which support cities and which cause them to grow at higher rates are things like, you know, the personal networks and the contacts that you get within cities. People who move out of cities often feel very isolated. And also the serendipitous interactions, which means that you might be more employable, that you develop more positive networks or social networks around you. There's access to government services, particularly in this age of ageing populations, to health services, but also education services. There are knowledge spillovers, so industries group together because there's the cooperative and competitive pressures, but there's also a lot of, you know, causal and casual interactions which happen on the street, in airports, at coffee shops, in lobbies, that sort of thing. There's cooperation and competition. There's the regional reputations and the value to the individual firms. So if you say, you know, I'm based in Silicon Valley, or if you're a fashion shop and you've got a workshop in Milan, you know, you get the prestige or the marketing advantage of the regional reputation. There's access to services and specialist suppliers. So a lot of people feel as though they need to be close to their accountants, their lawyers, their developers, the engineering firms that support their work. There's shared infrastructure. So, you know, some of the infrastructure which supports industries is incredibly expensive. Some of it is government subsidised. If you're in a city, you might have access to specialist infrastructure. And there's also all the cultural and lifestyle benefits that people talk about in terms of access to theatres, parks, recreation, sporting stadiums, music venues, that sort of thing. But along with cities, there's also negative externalities that arise, especially in fast-growing areas. So rents and cost of space can increase rapidly, and this is now seen to be a negative externality for areas like San Francisco, where a lot of firms can't even rent space to develop, so they need to have venture capital before they even get into that area. Transport and long commutes. If the transport and public transport system don't keep up with the growth in population, then you have dormitory suburbs developing in the outskirts, and people, usually working poor or what can become working poor, spending 2 to 4 hours a day just sitting on trains, buses, or in their cars. Pollution becomes a problem in the centre of a lot of major cities. There can become institutional isolation, and one of the reasons cited for the growth of the West Coast in the United States is that the East Coast became too institutionally stayed and isolated, in that people didn't talk to each other, and, you know, big corporations had these informational walls set up, whereas on the west coast of the United States, their culture was far more casual. There was far more opportunities for small businesses. So cities, especially the longer term stays, cities can develop this isolation between firms. There can become a lack of green space as space becomes more expensive and of a premium. You can lose the parks and the spaces where people exercise and become active. It can become too big to change. So a lot of the new tech parks set up in greenfields. They don't set up in urban areas because they need specialist new infrastructure that is too expensive to retrofit in older built environments. And one of the outcomes of Richard Florida's reflections on his early books, things like The Rise of the Creative Class and The Flight of the Creative Class, is that fast-growing, successful cities can become polarised into rich and poor suburbs very, very quickly. So you have divided cities, and this term that I bandied around a lot in my PhD thesis, which was socioeconomic spatial polarisation. So, you know, you can get that spiralling into very distinct areas of haves and have-nots, or the serviced information workers and providers and the people who service them in terms of, you know, being nannies, car washers, cleaners, that sort of thing. And as the wealth divide becomes stronger, the service workers live further out and they have to travel increasingly long distances to come into the other areas. So, and you know, that increasingly has entrenched disadvantage, and life chances can be determined by postcode. So there are a lot of negative externalities which go with cities and go with fast growing cities. So this term that is bandied around a lot, smart cities, we want to emphasise that it is far more than just the technology. It is far more than just the sensor networks and the AR, VR. It is far more than what a lot of, especially IT marketing companies, want to tell you, in that smart cities are fully automated, totally technology-rich cities. It's far more than that. Smart cities have got to work for the people and the economy within the city itself. And this is just a graphic on how rapidly the Internet of Things and sensor networks are predicted to grow in the next few years. So globally, there's by 2020, there's predicted to be 20 billion devices connected to the Internet or connected to platforms, even sub-platforms of the Internet, talking to each other, monitoring the environment and reacting and responding to environments around them. So in terms of smart cities, what makes cities more livable? And there are a number of livability indexes around the world. I think The Economist has one of the more used and more famous ones. And interestingly enough, 2 Australian cities regularly feature on the top 10 or top 5 livability indexes, being Melbourne and Sydney. And I was in Melbourne yesterday and it was 8 degrees and sleeting, and I've got no idea why that continues to go on the livability index. But there are things like, you know, they have access to services, access to health infrastructure, access to low levels of conflict, both urban conflict and, you know, external conflict. That's public safety is a big one. So things that from those lists, from a number of those lists, I've put together this list, which are active, healthy citizens, clean air, clean water and green spaces, less commuting, more human interactions. And there's a big intersection here between a livable city and an innovative city, because innovation has been shown on a number of papers to follow where human interaction happens. Public safety, as we were just saying, the quality of housing and accommodation. So not just the availability, but also the quality of housing and accommodation. A strong regional identity, so you're proud to be from where you are. Cultural participation, the free time that you have to actually develop internally. Civic participation, political openness and safety to say things that you believe. Income, wealth, including inequality, and a range of government services and infrastructure. So a big problem in regional Australia at the moment is access to government services, and a lot of people are claiming that they're being stranded in regions that government services are pulling out of, and that's a growing issue, and that is also causing greater urbanisation. So this is an example, I guess, of where we want to be with a smart city. We want to work smarter, have higher productivity, but work less. And, you know, when I was in year 10 in high school, we were all taught to expect that when we were in our 40s, we were going to be in the leisure age. We were going to have so much free time, and the holiday industries were going to be booming. But unfortunately, only a few countries have had that outcome, and Australia is not particularly one of them. So in Australia, we're working longer hours per person than we were in the 1980s, and we've got so much more technology to support it. So what we want to do is make that technology work for people within our country and give us more of the lifestyles that we aspire to. There's also a pandemic of physical inactivity, and George will be talking about this a lot more. But physical inactivity has just been related to a whole range of health problems, but particularly obesity, diabetes, cancers, and heart disease. And, you know, more and more in Australia, people are driving their kids to school. The car has become more important in family life, not less important, despite our increasingly urbanised environments. And to turn that around, you know, you don't have to do a lot. 60% of adult Australians did less than the recommended 30 minutes, only 30 minutes of moderate intensity activity every day. So that's just like walking to the bus stop for half an hour, that sort of thing. So it's not a big turnaround to do, but we have to design the cities to allow people to do that. So one of the projects that I worked on when I was in the Queensland government is the rise of co-working centres. So when I started working on this, no one in Queensland had heard of a co-working centre, knew what they were, had any idea of their benefits. And I heard of them through a group of visiting scholars from the Netherlands. They had developed this amazing government policy of allowing government workers from the city of Amsterdam to work in co-working centres around the city. And they didn't build that infrastructure. They just allowed their public servants to use them. So they bought, I think it was 60,000 desk hours at any accredited and occupational health approved co-working centre, and they started popping up everywhere. They did a trial with government owned and run co-working centres, and it didn't really work. They then developed this policy to let the private sector fill that need, and it did it amazingly well. So I did a trial within Queensland, or the department that I work for did a trial within Queensland to allow a certain number of public servants to use privately owned co-working centres an hour from the city. Instead of commuting in every day, they would work 1 or 2 days a week from these co-working centres an hour from the city. And these are lifestyle regions, so they're on the beach, they're close to families, they're close to facilities which people want. And they said, the statistics were astounding. I didn't put a slide in, but they said that, you know, 80% of people in the trial claimed that it improved their quality of life, it strengthened family and cultural bonds around their communities. It cut down on their work expenses because they didn't have to pay for petrol and parking. It improved their productivity. 83% said it improved their productivity. It was an all-round positive outcome. The problem that we faced in Queensland was that government thought that they could then do it internally because they owned a lot of office buildings, but there was a conflict between different priorities of different departments, and getting these whole of government schemes up in any jurisdiction is sometimes very difficult. You might know about that, Ed, in Alberta. But we did work incredibly hard with the departments to try and implement something similar to the Netherlands model in Queensland. And one of the other great things in the Netherlands was that they developed a whole range of apps to tell you where things are available locally. So you could scan your smartphone around and see that, you know, where the nearest bike for hire was. I think most bike hire schemes have got apps like this now, but at that stage in 2009, it was quite revolutionary. But also to see where desks were available to work, where the latest or the electric cars to hire were. You could basically scan your iPhone with a number of apps and see what was available to help you do whatever you needed to do that day. They also, you know, the Netherlands and Denmark, a lot of those Scandinavian countries are also world leaders in multimodal transport systems and share schemes. So, you know, bike infrastructure is just amazing. They have a very flat country though, so it makes sense to get everyone on their bikes. But they also have, you know, bad weather for 3 or 4 months a year. So, you know, people get out and ride in the snow or near snowing conditions. And so they have overcome a lot of those issues just with fantastic infrastructure. So in Australia, some of the other ways which we're using technology in cities are we're creating sensor network infrastructure in that we can anticipate maintenance in some of our big infrastructure before it needs to be done. So this is just a slide on the sensor networks which are now installed in the Sydney Harbour Bridge through CSIRO's projects, which will anticipate when things need to be changed or maintained before it actually happens. And it saves an enormous amount of money to replace things before they actually need to be replaced and they cause damage to other parts. Another big project in Sydney that CSIRO led was in the water infrastructure. So instead of having an old pipe burst and causing a lot of damage in the suburb, the pipe is replaced. And the sensor networks around the pipe measure things like water pressure, age of or deterioration of the pipe, the soil conditions around the pipe. So in certain conditions in clay soils, that pipe is more likely to burst. So they claim to have saved Sydney Water millions and millions of dollars in replacing pipes before they actually need to be replaced, and therefore avoiding all the damage that is done by poorly maintained infrastructure. So that is a smart use of technology. Here in Australia too, we've got a huge push with open data. And this is a map which CSIRO has developed in consultation with the federal government to geospatialise a lot of that open data. So on this map, there are things like where facilities are, even where public toilets are, anything that is on the state-based open data sites or the national open data site can be mapped and can be added. So you just go to this map, you add data, and you can build up different layers of the data that you want to see on this map. On top of that, more and more states and councils are publishing huge amounts of public data on their open data set websites. That means that the developer community can develop the apps that people want and need from that public data. So, and you know, what I've been advocating for is a wish list of apps, so that people can say, I really want an app which tells me when the buses arrive, or I really want an app which tells me where all the attacks have happened in Brisbane in the last 2 weeks. And some developer, either internal to government or external to government, can actually develop that map. So there has to be a three-way conversation between the developer community, between the public sector, and between the users or the citizens of the jurisdiction. And there have to be platforms developed to create that three-way conversation. Another technology with huge application, and it's a boom industry here in Brisbane, is the augmented and virtual reality sector, which has the potential to do all these beautiful information overlays on, you know, geospatially marked places throughout the city. So you could potentially do historical walks. I went to Tasmania before Easter, and they have a new art museum down there. As soon as you enter a room, all the information on all the artwork comes up onto the iPod that they hand you on the way in. You can hear interviews with the artist. You can view extra or related materials from that artist. It's a beautiful thing. They're just some of the examples, but there's a whole range of occupational examples too in Australia. Mine sites are doing AR and VR so that they can visualise where the deposits are, so that they can put, say, explosives in the right place, whatever they're doing. Medical people are using AR to find veins in people's arms. Again, you know, this technology can be used for a lot of good and to create a lot of efficiencies, and also just to enhance the experience of walking through environments. Crowdsourcing and citizen input is another fantastic technology which I think is enhancing a lot of the information gathering. So this is a koala tracker map. It's crowdsourced. People cite koalas. They can put it on this map. People can see where the preservation effort needs to occur. So there are only certain eucalypt trees that koalas eat, and you can see pretty clearly where the koalas are clustered and where they need to protect certain areas, even things like place restrictions on dogs and cats in those areas so the koalas are protected. A lot of the things which enhance urban life are not tech-centred. So there's a growing trend in green corridors, converting old freeways in a lot of centres. I get very envious about that because I'd love more of that to happen in Queensland. But creating large green corridors that help people become active instead of sitting in cars. And allotments are big in the UK. Here in Australia, we have things like community gardens. And, you know, they're a great way to meet people, but also to share food and grow your own food and just have more locally produced things on the table every day and every night. So I'll just hand over to George now. He's been doing a lot of work, as we said at the beginning, in the transformation of cities.
Great, thanks, Lucy. So, I'll share with you a project that we're getting up and running right now with the private property developer, and it's in the field of urban living labs, and that's a globally recognised term now. There's lots of initiatives in Europe and North America. In Australia, we're been a little bit slow on the uptake with this concept. So I know a lot of people have been toiling in this space. Me personally, I've spent probably a few years trying to get this particular project up, and the challenge is quite simple. We go to planners and developers and we say, look, we want to create an urban environment, and in this case, it's in a new urban development where it's safe to fail and it's open-ended. We're not prescribing from the outset exactly how this development's going to look, and planners and developers look at you like you've got two heads. It just does not make sense. The antithesis of what they typically do. What they're trying to do is, even if the development is has a 30-year time frame, this is like a large master plan community, they typically want to know day one exactly how that community is going to look 30 years out. So, so prediction and control is huge, and what we're trying to do is suggest to them that for a small percentage of developments, we think you should do it differently, and incorporate this concept of user-led innovation with an open innovation ecosystem. So, so this is what we've been endeavouring to do. We've found a partner in Western Sydney and a council that is open to this dialogue. And I'll share a little bit about what we mean by I guess our version of an urban living lab. And the idea is that all the information that Lucy was talking about in terms of obesity, all the sort of, I guess, big trends, pollution, resource depletion, we start to incorporate that into the challenges that we set innovators and designers for these new parts of cities. And we essentially build an innovation community around the awareness of these challenges. And so the foresighting that we do in Data 61 is going to become central to this program. And this is a little bit of the process that we're trying to implement. We're just getting this started. What we aim to have are several urban living labs that are networked across Australia, and each living lab will have a particular focus. And the first one that we have up in that we're getting up in Western Sydney will have a particular focus on urban heat island effect, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this slide is just to highlight where we're coming from with the strategic foresight work that we've done in CSIRO. It really came out of some work that the leader of our unit, Stefan Hajkovic, pioneered on essentially bringing together CSIRO research into a digestible, easily understandable set of megatrends. And these are those megatrends. I won't go into those in any detail, but you can get the gist of some of these. So the top one there, more from less, that's all about all the trends that we have in relation to resource depletion, the declining quality of ore bodies in the mining sector, all those things that signal to us that we actually can't pursue the extractive economy that we've had in the past, that we need to move to more circular economy type concepts. So these are some of the big challenges that we are using to drive the Urban Living Lab program. Now, I mentioned that the first project in Western Sydney has an urban heat island effect as its focus, as its core theme. And one of the concepts that we're really interested in pursuing is this idea of massively increasing the green cover and canopy in cities. Now, to do that, you need massive amounts of nutrients and water, and our systems, our water system is not geared up for that. You may have heard that Australia's had periods of pretty profound, protracted droughts, and as well as periods of flood. So we need to be able to manage our water better to achieve this goal of increasing green cover and using vegetation to mitigate urban heat and extreme heat events in urban areas. So this is a concept that's coming out of Germany, the Fraunhofer Institute. And the thing to note about this concept is that it involves water technologies, I guess a constellation of technologies. So there's pipes, there's treatment plants, there's reservoirs, there's the interface between networked water infrastructure, so pipes and the green infrastructure, the vegetation. And then there's an interface with energy infrastructure in the form of biogas digesters. So there's lots to this system that need to work for the system as a whole to work. And previously, what we've been hampered by is regulators don't typically know how to handle that kind of complexity, nor do our asset managers and planners. So we're used to managing these resources, energy and water, in separate sectors, and those systems of provisions in energy and water have been built up over many decades, in some cases centuries. And so with that built up of knowledge, we're confident that we understand how to manage those resources. The moment you try to change that and make the system more integrated, as this example from Fraunhofer is doing, we need to build up our knowledge again of how to make these systems robust and fail-safe. So the thing is, we don't have the luxury of many decades or a century to build up that knowledge. We need to build up that knowledge now, in the next few years. If we take Sydney, for example, where our project will be located, last summer Sydney had 11 days, I think, over 40 degrees, and I was in there during January, and in January alone they had 8 days over 40 degrees. I actually grew up in Sydney as a kid, and we never had 40-degree temperatures in Sydney. It was very rare. So Sydney, our cities, not just Sydney, but other cities in Australia and obviously around the world, they're moving into a new climate reality, and they're moving fast. And so we need to build up our knowledge and our technologies to respond to this new climate pronto. So this is where sensors can help us. So digital technologies can come to our rescue. We can infiltrate sensors throughout this whole system and get real-time information about water quality, about the health of the green cover and the extent of cover, temperature, all sorts of information in real time, and we can learn about how the system's working or not working. Lucy mentioned before about physical activity. This is a huge problem in Australia, as it is in much of the Western world. I think Australia is excelling in this area. So something like 2/3 of Australians are overweight or obese, fall into those categories, and I think we're approaching 30% obesity.
Wow.
So this is a really shocking trend. And so we're going to have to reimagine our cities as our economies keep developing and moving into the service-based economy and knowledge economy. We are going to find ourselves, if we're not careful, becoming more sedentary, sitting in cars and sitting in offices. So in this urban living lab, we're going to look at concepts that reimagine how we do knowledge work. We're not doing it sitting down, we're doing it on our feet. And the example that I've got there in that image is actually not, this is not new technology. This is an example of a walk station, which I think they were starting to roll these out in the US and maybe a few other countries in the late 2000s. So it's not necessarily new technology, but we know that with digital technologies and smart devices like wearables and even our smartphones, we can get apps that tell us when we're being sedentary and when to exercise, and that can help us in that way. But those technologies don't mean anything if the context, the physical and social context, is around sedentary behavior. So if our workplace is full of desks where you have to sit at, or if our transportation system is such that we find ourselves sitting most of the time to get around. So when Lucy talks about, we need to mesh the digital with the physical world and make that smart, make that connection smart. This is about where we think we need to go. And there are also some technologies, digital technologies, at the frontier of the social transformation that we're going through at the moment. This is one example where, to assist humans, and this has particular applications for the aging population and assisting elderly people and allowing them to age at home. But the prospect of having assistive robots and really looking at the potential for smart robots to help us, in the case of elderly people, to manage their household, their home, while their physical abilities might be changing. This is something that we also want to explore. Australia, like many parts of the developed world, is going through a profound shift into the aging population, and we need to figure out how to manage that cost effectively. And I'm conscious that we're running short of time, so I'll just start to skip over these last slides. We're also interested in new peer-to-peer sharing platforms. Obviously, there's benefits to these platforms from the perspective of asset utilization, and we're all familiar with things like Airbnb. But also there's the prospect that we could have technological unemployment or structural unemployment due to technology, and we may need to actually start getting goods and services without having as much money, because we're working part-time, or we're otherwise underemployed, and we've got some good data in Australia around the growth, massive growth in underemployment. So we're very interested in concepts like time banking. New South Wales government is working with a time banking system to assist vulnerable groups in their jurisdiction, and this is something that we're keen to explore as well. And I might just leave it at that and jump to the take-home messages, which I think Lucy's going to take us through.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess, what we do need to do, instead of just employing whatever technology is around it, what ICT companies tell us we need to implement within our cities because there's great inefficiencies. We need to implement technologies in a smart, tested and scalable way, which is kind of what George was talking about in his urban living labs. We need to show that it's actually improving lives and creating efficiencies. We can't just employ all this technology and find out at the end that it's not working and that it's actually creating new problems. I guess we do also want to emphasise that all change has risk, and that is what the Urban Living Lab tries to mitigate. Some of the big risks we see with things like the Internet of Things are things like how it's all going to be powered, like the battery technology behind all the sensors that are in the environment, how they're going to be charged. And, a lot of them come with micro solar units. Some of them don't because they're embedded. And the platforms on which they're going to work. So there's a global war at the moment with a lot of the big ICT companies on developing the platforms on which the Internet of Things is going to operate. And of course, on the Internet of Things, interoperability is key to making the whole thing work. Because if you don't have machines talking to each other seamlessly, it's not going to work. So there are risks with every change, and you have to look at the good and the bad with any implementation of technology. We're also possibly looking at privacy and the Internet of Things, especially with wearables. We all know that the United States has had a big problem with microwaves spying on people. So we have to look at, that was a joke, we don't think that, but we have to look at how that might be affecting our different spheres of engagement within private life, public life, work life, home life, that sort of thing. And we have to make digital technology work for our cities and make them livable and vastly more efficient. And citizens need to be involved in that development. We can't leave people out of it and say, we know what works. So the Urban Living Labs methodologies, we think, are one of the better methodologies in assisting that transformation. But, fantastic opportunities ahead, but it comes with risk and it needs to be tested. Have you got any final words, George?
No, I think that's good. Good sum up. Let's keen to take any questions and explore this topic further.
Well, while folks are thinking of questions, one thing that I wanted to ask while they formulate questions is, it seems to me that what you guys are onto and what communities around the world is, it seems to me that with the technology that's available in urban settings, that you know, that you can work anywhere in the world. You know, like we're doing right now with a broadband connection. You can have the future in Australia at 11 a.m. and it's 7 p.m. in Alberta. So you can work from anywhere in the world, but where you choose to live is based to a large degree on the quality of life that you as an individual choose. And I think that's one of the things that you guys really did well, was sort of a holistic look and view of both technical and social innovation. Because if you just have technical and you don't really have social innovation, then no one will adopt, you know, that technology, and they won't really use it for maximum effect and improvement of lives. So I think you guys are really on to a holistic view. But what do you think about that, as far as, like, if your tax base is based on keeping residents and it's really about quality of life, then that becomes a different way of looking at planning the city. And I think you guys are looking in a very balanced way. But what do you think about quality of life?
Yeah. So I think you know, quality of life is at the centre of it, because the livability of our cities is becoming more important in the economy of our cities as well. Because if you can work from anywhere, you can also move to anywhere. And so you have to keep citizens happy and engaged. And the stickiest part of a lot of economies is actually in the people. Because industries can move offshore in years, but the people don't necessarily want to go. So, for instance, in Brisbane, in 2009, the Australian dollar rose really rapidly against the US, and a lot of our ICT companies moved offshore really quickly. However, the people didn't. The labs here closed, but the people with all the skills stayed. They were transferable skills to other industries. So the knowledge intensification in the real estate sector and the mining sector and the other sectors suddenly rose really quickly, because the people who were employed in gaming and ICT companies in particular just got jobs in other sectors, and it still aided the economy. So that livability was crucial to creating you know, competitive advantages in other sectors. So I think, you know, if you don't take a holistic view of it, you're not going to achieve sustainable innovation in any centre. And that whole idea of technopoles, which was first espoused by Manuel Castells in his work in the 1990s, and then Florida's work on top of that about, you know, the creative class is the key to innovation. You know, you've got to merge them all together. But on top of that, you've got to bring in all this literature on subjective well-being and happiness and livability and what makes people stay in an environment, because it's, you know, we are living in a global world, we are competitive, and in that global world, you know, you want to be happy in where you live, and you want to be able to stay where you live. And as I said, it's crucial for social, but also the economic health of the city. Do you have anything to add, George?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think there's a tension between digital helping you live and work wherever you want, and being co-located with lots of creative, knowledgeable people and the benefits that flow from that. So I think we're still resolving that. It's not, it's, you know, the research indicates that the more connected we become, the more we want to coalesce in major cities. But we can also, so that's what the trend is, but we can always also see counter arguments, I guess, mounting, you know, with you know, certain cities, you know, sort of growing, becoming too big, and the negative externalities kind of overriding the positive.
Yeah.
So this is something that we're working with. We can see there's a tension there, and there's a great sort of policy kind of battle going out in Australia between the prospects, the economic prospects of regions versus cities, and yeah, this is it's a live debate.
Mm.
Well, another thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about, and it was inspired by a colleague of yours, Dr. Yvette Blount, who presented into the series on telework. And after Yvette presented on telework, what I reflected on, and I'll throw this Peter F. Druckerism out. One of his sayings was, the stupidest thing in the world is to do something efficiently that shouldn't be done at all. And why that came up based on Yvette's presentation was, and it's this technical and social innovation. I mean, everybody is fixated on driverless cars. I mean, Google started a new startup, and Apple, and everybody's talking about driverless cars. But Yvette's point was, well, geez, why drive at all? Why not boot the commute and telework? You'd have all these quality of life benefits, but that's where it's like this, getting at this, if you don't have social innovation, with the technical innovation may not be implemented. So that's why I introduced that Druckerism.
That's a great point. I know that with urban development in Australia, there's been a lot of spectacular failures of new developments, typically satellite suburbs and satellite cities, I suppose, that have really endeavoured to create that business hub and attract businesses and keep and achieve high self-containment rates. Number of people living there, also working there, and it's been really hard. I think there's a lot of our planning knowledge and a lot of our I suppose the way we structure our economy just seems to be geared towards big cities, and we're finding it really difficult to sort of get our head around the type of urban form and I suppose institutional and economic structure that might facilitate a more decentralized approach. So probably talk on some of the policy.
Yeah, so I mean, we're kind of excited about driverless cars here too, and there's a couple of trials going on. However, as you say, Ted, they're still cars and they still take up road space, and they're still transporting a few people per vehicle. They're not trains and they're not necessarily buses, although driverless trains and buses are certainly coming too. But really what the co-working trial tried to do was, instead of bringing the people to the work, bring the work to the people. And the other dynamic in big cities, which I think is causing massive intensification in the CBD areas, is the fact that 2 people in every family work generally now, in Australia anyway, and that means that you have to be close to 2 workplaces, not 1. Now, if you can do one of those jobs part-time at home, that takes the pressure off both parents commuting all the time. I live close to the CBD in this city. I walk to a train station. That takes me 20 minutes. I get on a train, I go to work. My husband generally rides or walks to work. But we're lucky and we're an exception. Most people in Queensland commute at least 30 to 40 minutes a day, mostly in cars or on trains. Somehow we need to look at the city design to ensure that those people, including the 2 working people in there, have quality of family life, have social connections within their communities, and don't spend so much time commuting. One of the big benefits I saw about bringing work to the people was that these satellite suburbs and dormitory suburbs further out could at least support, that 2-income family. If one of them had to commute, another one could stay at home. But there would be a diverse, there are problems with working from home too, in that, it's not a work community. at least with a flexible work centre or a co-working centre, you've got that second work community. You go in there, you talk to the people around you, you pick up skills, you do peer-to-peer learning. There's a lot of benefits of having that work community, but you want it close to where you live. So it was a way, I guess, of using technology to support all of that and stop our cities just becoming more and more focused on the transport systems to bring everyone into one place every day. And yeah, I think instead of, you're right, Ted, instead of just looking at how to do things more efficiently, you could look at how to do things differently to make sure that the livability of the place increases, you know, exponentially as opposed to incrementally. Okay.
And I guess I would give you both some moments, your final thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, I guess my final thoughts are has to be done in collaboration with the people within the city. You know, if you do it alone at your peril, all change has risk. And yeah, trial and error. We need to make mistakes as well. You know, I think the greatest thing scientists have is that they're good at failing. And, you know, science is this field of knowing that you've done something wrong and reviewing it and learning how to correct it. So, you know, we're good at that, aren't we, George?
Yeah, and we need to figure out a way of, you know, essentially taking that lab type experience of you know, the spaces that we have in CSIRO, taking that that lab environment to the city, and this is partly what we're trying to do with this Urban Living Lab program, is create an experimental space that is in a real life built environment, and you know, the take home for me is, you know, to find a way to open up that dialogue, you know, in your own city or in your own jurisdiction with authorities that you know, we talk about really successful companies having a small proportion of their revenue going into R&D. They might have a skunk works and a unit, so a group of people that spend time you know, trying something and failing, you know, doing R&D. We need to essentially replicate that in cities. It doesn't have to be everywhere. We're not saying that all urban development or redevelopment needs to have this, but a small percentage in your city, in your state or jurisdiction needs to have these spaces.
And I guess the other thing is that urban design today isn't just the space, like it's not just drawing lines on a map, it's the space, it's the technology, it's the people. You have to integrate them all together, and the economy.
Excellent. Well, this was a fantastic presentation. Thanks so much for volunteering to present for us. And of course, the presentation will be posted to our partner YouTube channel. So anyone can find that presentation within YouTube by searching for MCCAC. And we'll post that very quickly. Excellent presentation.
Thanks very much, Ted.
Cheers, Ted.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.